Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen's meeting for May 11, May 10, 2023. And we are going to disclose that we're being video recorded, and we always start with a moment to appreciate our troops who are serving our country.
Recording in progress.
See, ignore me.
Thank you. And we're going to start with a update of the Open Space and Recreation Plan. Jerry Potts, Chair of the committee, is here. Jerry? Want me to go up there?
Sure, why not?
It's probably best, because I think that microphone is better for people at home to hear you.
It's good for me to stand. My watch likes it. Gives me enthusiastic response when I stand. So I think we actually, there we go, look at that. So for the folks either at home or watching this on video, and obviously all of you, the almost 200 pages that you had to slog through, I figured I would at least start with a little bit of a summary that calls out the key things. So what we're here tonight to do is just give you an update on the status of it, answer any questions, and let you know the progress. And we're hopefully, knock on wood, on pretty good shape. So if we can go to the second slide. So this is what's been done so far. 2 public forums. We had the 2019 survey. I'll talk about the 2023 survey. A lot of written comments, meeting with a lot of the different parties in town. We looked at the past open space and recreation plan, and then the one that almost got across the finish line in 2019. The townwide master plan is a critical document here, and then also the select board goals, which are updated, and we just got those actually in the newest document, thanks to Brittany, so I want to thank her for getting that to us last night, and the consultant turning it around that fast. We have the state hospital plan, and then for anyone who is at home, the link to that is the Open Space and Recreation Plan site, and that is the link for it. We encourage you to go there. The next slide will show what it looks like. You can go there. That little red box, which I added, is what you would click on to get the small document for light reading. And with that, for those of you who are following along, if we can go to the next slide. So on the left-hand side is the steps that we need before we can submit this to the state. The goal right now is to have this submitted by the end of June. And we are in the process of going to the stakeholders and getting approval. Planning board, in recognition of Sarah Raposa, I think it was her last meeting, they gave her a send-off by approving it, so that's a good thing. And Chris had flowers, but they gave her an approved plan. The Conservation Commission, we've had a couple of conversations. Catherine Scott, who's on that, has been updating them. We have circulated the most recent draft and the inventory of all the town property. We're waiting for questions on that, trying to get on their docket. They've been quite busy with Trinity and a few other things that are going on. Park and Rec actually met last night, and they gave a conditional approval. So there were 2 elements that they wanted clarification. One was trivial. It was 3 properties that were in that very long inventory that they wanted care and custody to be adjusted. That's an easy fix. Second one was on an issue with Lowell Mason, the Lowell Mason house, and they're working through that with town council. But they had no substantive issues on any of the core part of the document, and they did approve it last night at their meeting. The Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee, we will approve it. So we're not holding out on this, but we're trying to get in front of everyone else. And then the final thing is the Disability Committee. There's an ADA checklist. They have to post a meeting, and that meeting has to take place to basically verify that they attest to everything that's being promised in there. They made a lot of changes. The last plan in 2019 was held up because of ADA concerns that came back from the state, and so therefore, the hope is we can get those addressed and approved. They're part of this plan, but we just need them to have a meeting and review it. And then finally, but last but not least, you're actually on the top of the list is the select board, since you're the ones who chartered this whole thing and kicked off this committee. So if I can go to the next slide, what I've done is there are 10 main sections to it. And the first 4 sections are actually incredibly interesting. I encourage you to read them. A lot of people contributed to it throughout the town, different committees. Richard DeSorga, it's the history of the town, the community. Those have come from a variety of documents that we already have, but they've been updated. I've highlighted in green where it gets interesting, which is section 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Section 5, the only thing I want to just say quickly on this, there's been a ton of work done on this. Sarah Raposa, pages 47 through 51 of the document is a very extensive inventory, which she has gone painstakingly through literally every piece of property, verified, the original charter, who owns it, amazing amount of work on this. To have one person working on this has been bouncing around. I think we had it here on an easel in the last meeting. She's updated that. That link is also available directly to the town inventory from the Open Space and Recreation site. There's a separate worksheet, but it's also included in the master document. The other call out I want to give is pages 61 through 96. George Lester, I cannot say enough about the work he did, because while the page 47 through 51 of, I think, 0.4 point type is incredibly important for the town, for most people outside of, Concom and other folks that want a specific piece of land, they just know this is Noon Hill. And so what George has done is actually gone through and it's 35 pages, of taking that document with a small type and grouping all of it in a meaningful way for the public. And he did this on virtually every piece of property, that the town owns. So I want to give a shout out to George for the amount of time, effort, and energy. If you look at it on pages 61 through 96, he really did a good job of giving, if you come to this location, here's its current status. It's made up of these 8 different plots. So there are 2 distinct documents within the inventory, and I just want to give them recognition, both Sarah and George, for an amazing amount of work that they put into that. Section 6, which is pages 97 and 98, comes directly from the townwide master plan. So that's been vetted and approved as part of the townwide master plan. Section 7, which is 99 through 102, is the analysis of needs. And so the 3 things that lead up to the 7-year action plan are the needs, the goals and objectives, both from the townwide master plan and the select board goals. And if you look at pages 102 to 106, the plan also includes responses and points out from the open space and recreation plan what sections attempt to address the goals of the selectmen. And also throughout, when you look at the 7-year action plan, does a really nice job, and I give credit to Wayne Feeden, who did a great job as the consultant of mapping the 7-year action plan specifically to the townwide master plan and the select board goals. So when we get into section 9, it's the 7-year action plan. That goes pages 109 up to 124, and there is a quick reference, which is your cheat sheet. If you look at pages 125 and 126, it lists all the specific actions that are part of the 7-year action plan, and gives a time frame, sort of level of complexity, who owns it. And I think that's probably should have actually been flipped and been the first document, because it sort of gives you a sense for all the details that follow.
Yeah.
And then public section 10 are the public comments. And if you look at the public comments, I'll show a couple of slides on that in a second. If I can just go to the next slide, that'd be great.
Yep.
And again, the whole plan's good, but I've called out the green as sort of being the newest stuff. Actually, sorry, no problem.
This isn't anywhere in the document. This is something you did after the fact.
This is simply, every single thing that's being referenced here is to just help you quickly get to the document.
Are you going to share your slides with us at some point?
Absolutely.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Actually, Frank has them.
That
so-
would have helped when I started reading this on.
I understand, and I tried to do it with the email, at least, that aimed you in a couple of sections through
Okay. Yes.
Brittany. So, but I realized as I was correcting my 80 20-page papers with BC, it would be a lot easier to do this. So, on the 7-year action plan, what I did is I put the pages that address each. So 107, 109, 111, 112. Again, these are in the outline, but we haven't put the page numbers yet in the outline at the beginning because we're still getting comments, so the page numbers would change. So when you go to at the very beginning of the actual plan, these sections are all called out, but we just haven't added the page numbers because we're getting changes.
Okay, perfect.
Once we lock it down, that will have page numbers and, like getting the goals, for example, change the pagination a little bit.
I
So,
would encourage you to add those page numbers. That would have helped me a lot in
Yep.
looking at it. The other thing that I'm finding is very useful in PDFs are adding bookmarks. I don't know if anybody else does that, but I like those.
yeah, we've just been getting so many changes, honestly. For example, we just got George's, which is 35 pages. He just got that completed within the past week. So you can imagine if we put bookmarks in and then you add 35 pages in the middle, it kind of blows everything up. So
Yep,
the
I get that.
formatting we will take care of that. I agree with you. And that's sort of why I did it, actually, was for me to say, okay, I need to quickly kind of know what each of these things does. In the 7-year action plan, there are 11 actions that we're recommending. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on all of them tonight. This is really actually just to sort of set the stage. We're going to come back and ask for
Good.
formal approval. This is really just to lay it out to you so you can read it. I mean, if you decide you want to vote tonight, we take the vote. I mean, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. So I'll look at you guys and you can tell me whether or not that's but in particular, and I'll go through some of the research that we got from the survey on sort of where people are at and where their priorities are in a second. The first one, the Community Preservation Act, this is something that's been talked about. We are not in any way saying that this needs a lot of work. We need to be able to go out, build a case on this. I will say from when Medfield looked at this, there have been some major changes in a good way for this. So the concern was when we looked at it, I don't know, Pete, 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
Longer.
Maybe longer. I know we wanted to resurrect it and do it again. But at that time, the amount that was being reimbursed by the state was dropping. So if you were late to it, you were going to get 10 cents on the dollar as opposed to 30 cents on the dollar. The state has fully funded it, and then the average right now is between 30 to 40% reimbursement on the CPA. So we will try to make the case, and I'll show you some data on the survey that we did on sort of gauging level of knowledge. You can imagine that the average person right now, when you look at it, really doesn't fully understand, where the CPA is. And even if you did a few years ago, it's changed. And we're going to try to make the case to the town that it's a better deal for the town than it was. Especially when you look at, and I'll quickly go through it at the end of the number of projects that we've had. Just the 15,000 we just voted for at town meeting for the Affordable Housing Trust would have been covered by CPA.
So that was very instructive for me. That's the biggest thing in my mind is that we're going to be doing the projects in these 3 areas that we have to
100%.
spend on in any event. And so what we're missing out on is the state match to get more done.
Yeah, and I would sort of throw it out. I know I don't mean to bring this up as controversial. It's the same thing with the MSBA, right? It's that sort of double-edged sword of you get to save money and it fits into these buckets, but these are buckets we are spending money on. And when you see the list that we're going to come up with on where priorities are, they're there. So, and we're already with deed registration, we're already putting in $150,000 into the CPA that we don't get. So
We're paying it to other towns.
where other towns get it, and we don't have a chance for it. So all we're really saying is that we'd obviously need to go through the entire process. It would need to come in front of the town. We would need to vote this, but at least to seriously consider it, because the types of projects we're looking at, especially given the fact that it is a robustly funded project now. The state is funding this fully, wants towns to use this. So even though more towns have joined it, as I said, it's between 30 to 40 cents on the dollar that's coming back on the CPA now.
And it actually works out that you get more if you go with the 3%, the higher percentage. So that's what makes sense to me to.
Yeah, I do have a
Bite the
slide
bullet.
which I'll show you, Pete, and it's also in the plan. It's if you go to page 107, there are the numbers on it. I also understand that taxes are an issue. I understand fiscal responsibility. So we have to make a compelling case. I think we can, that it saves the town money on projects we're going to do when you have 30 cents coming, but very well, aware that this is going to be a discussion, open forums, hearings, coming out of this. So this is not saying that you approve the CPA, it's that you approve us looking at the opportunity fully. And I've said to folks that I'm willing to help in any way after this plan to try to make a case for it and try to listen to the town and figure out what's best to, to happen there.
So I think the key on that for the tax issue is to make it tax neutral. And the way you make it tax neutral is to go ahead and let people approve the CPA and have a second companion article that is an underride to the Prop 2.5 limit that's equivalent to the increase in revenue in the CPA. So what basically that then does is the CPA, the state has incentivized the town to restructure its tax structure. Now that'll do one of two things. Either people will say, okay, we get it, we want the match. So we'll approve the CPA, we'll get the match, and we'll also approve the underride. So the money that we're going to pay through CPA, and I agree with Pete, we ought to go with you got to do it, in for a dime, in for a dollar.
Yep.
Get the 3%, but you do the underride, and if people instead say, no, I don't mind being taxed more,
Right.
they'll turn the underride down.
Right.
And so it's kind of like, you tell us whether you want to pay more taxes, or if you just want to respond to this, you'll see my comments I have for you.
Yep.
Pavlovian dynamic that the state has with the towns where they hold things up and we jump up to get them. We can play that game, and assuming that some of the earlier objections that I had, that I really took from Mike Marcucci at the time, after the Charles River Watershed Group talked and they said things have changed, I actually have to close the loop on it. Somewhere in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be sitting down with them to talk about it, so they can explain to me. Because if there's literally a way that we can just change our tax structure and get a state match, then I have no problem with it anymore. Before it was, no, they're giving you the matching funds for the categories you're not putting money into, so it's not really doing anything for you. And it's a shoehorn way to put in a tax increase by putting it in a different spot. If you neutralize it, or if you let the taxpayers say, no, we don't want it neutralized, we aren't paying enough taxes yet, we'd like to pay more because of all the great ideas you have, that's all I need to hear.
No, this is a good, and the other thing that was true a few years ago is it was a dwindling amount. So if you were getting later in, you were getting less reimbursement on it. So, I think it's a good opportunity, given what we know we're facing, to figure out how we prioritize and how we spend the money. So those ideas are all great. How we get there, if we get there, there's a lot of work to do to make it happen. So again, I want to make it clear, this is not saying you are, even by approving the plan, that you're voting for the CPA. You're just starting the process to be able to explore other ways to be able to fund it. Because one thing you will see coming out of this is, I think benign neglect is not a strategy to maintain land was one of the lines in here. So, the idea that we just kind of hope it all takes care of itself, you're going to see that people want to support this. It's just scattered a little bit all over town. So a lot of the frustration we're talking about on maintenance of, which you've said at the select board meetings, existing properties we have that are not being taken care of because we just haven't had the resources and a way to do it. At some point, we're going to have to figure out the way to do it. So I'm not going to go through each of these, today, because we'd be here for a real long time. So we look forward to getting any questions you have. Please submit them as soon as possible. We'd like to come back towards the end of the month, see if we can get the approval for it, so that in early June, with any comments that have come, from any of the commissions, any of the committees, that we can submit it by that June 30th, because we'd like to be, if we can, involved in any grants that could happen in the fall. So that's sort of the cycle. If we can go to the next one, since I knew Eileen was most interested in the public input part. No sound effects, Eileen. We're just going to have to use charts.
No drum roll? Okay.
So there were three main questions that we were asking, and this first one answers what I think every survey says. When you ask people what they want everything. So you see here, there's not a lot of variation when you just say, hey, what do you think? Low to high, what's important? It's all important, right? And so I want to give Lauren, who's on the committee, a shout out, because what we tried to do, instead of sending another survey out, we had great survey results from 2019, the townwide master plan, as well as we wanted to drill down specifically in a couple of areas to force choice. So the first one was to confirm these are from the plan. Number one was conservation land. Number 2 was park and recs. Number 3 was a community center. So those were the top 3. But they didn't have to make a choice here. I don't want to bury the lead. 451 people filled this survey out. So it was a pretty well done survey as far as getting the respondents we needed. If we can go to the next slide, this is question 2. There we go. So here we said you got to rank. You got to make a priority here. So 1 through 10, and this is one of the charts. I don't want to mess you up. The low number's good. It's golf. Okay, so if everyone said number 1 on one issue, that number would be 1, right? So the lower number here means that's the priority. The ones to the right are people rank them 7th, 8th, 9th on the list. So the top 3 here were conservation land, maintenance, park and rec fields, and the community center. So this helped a little bit to say you can't have it all. You got to put them in a rank order. Those 3 come through as the top. And then if you go to the next one, we force them even harder as a taxpayer would. Gus, you should like this one. You have $100. You have 100 points. You could put 100 on one. You could split it any way you wanted, but you only have 100. How would you put it? And in this one, the bigger number is the priority, right? So in this one, the community center came out number 1. So the order didn't really, the park and rec fields dropped a little bit. Conservation land was number 2 here. And then, the park and rec facility was number 3. Park and rec fields were number 4. So basically the bottom 3 were the top, with the community center being the single biggest one, the average being, 24 points were allocated to it.
I would say what I was fascinated by was the top 3 bounced around, which tells me, okay, those are the top 3. But this one here, I imagine, would be biased in the sense that people would not think we would. If I had $100, I wouldn't plan to spend as much money on signs as I would on a building.
I was going to say
there's a price tags on these things are a little different.
Totally right. So there's some things that are just common sense, don't cost a lot of money, and people say they still said it was important. And you'll notice on the plan later, there's both a timetable and sort of relative complexity that's associated with all these things. So signage, wayfaring, those are really easy and don't cost a lot of money.
Can I ask
please.
you one question about this, though, Jerry?
Sure.
Because you're on the townwide master plan, which is where I first saw the concept of a community center as distinct from a parks and rec facility. Can you help me in, I'm trying to understand, first off, recognizing the parks and rec facility has been promised. I've been here 28 years, and it was number 5 on the list. My youngest son wasn't born at the time. He's now 25, and there is no parks and rec facility. So recognizing that not even that one made it, we're now having a discussion about 2 different facilities. But how do you differentiate those 2 and compound question, and explain why the town needs 2?
Well, I don't know if we need to, and that's what we have to explore more and drill down. The idea of a community center, there certainly are a lot of things that Park and Rec does in the FAF Center today. I certainly wouldn't call that a Park and Rec facility that are community-based activities. And so I think the question comes, is this a 4 kicks, or is this a building that we all can share for a variety of reasons?
Right.
And I think that appealed to a wider audience. If you look at certainly anyone with kids and they're driving all over the place, they want a park and rec facility because they don't want to drive all over to go to basketball courts and soccer fields and all of that stuff. But if you ask the broader town what they're willing to support, something that seniors who want to do dance or mahjong or whatever as a community center, I think there's a broader support because you're cutting across more demographics. The other thing we heard, and it was certainly in the townwide master plan, is teens and kids who don't have places to go, right? And right now there are not a lot of good solutions for that. So if you could do community programming in the center of town, and that was the other thing that came out of the townwide master plan was would they like it in the center, so that you could walk to it, you could drop kids off there, go to dinner, come back and make an event, revitalize the downtown, keep the downtown active. So I think that's the biggest difference is, you know, the pure park and rec tends to go for the folks that are more sports oriented, more activity oriented, whereas the community center is viewed as broader.
So, I mean, the reason I asked the question is because when it first came out with the townwide master plan, my first reaction was negative only because there were two facilities and they seemed to be, no, I didn't sense that they were being combined, but as I've reflected on it more, and I've started to think about a COA that wants an expansion, which is a capital expansion.
Yep.
You want Parks and Rec that wants a facility that they've never been able to really get it. There are some other needs in the town that a community center could, you know, basically a center that has is an asset that is multifunctional is a lot easier for me to kind of, it requires a different way of thinking about what we thought our capital needs were, but it's hitting more targets with a single building that might be a nicer building than anybody would have had the audacity to try to build for themselves. They still got location issues and things like that to figure out, but I'm actually, my thinking is shifting on this one a little bit that says, well, wait a minute, it's not, if it's not two, if it's one, and if it's one that addresses a whole bunch of needs, and you know, what you're saying here is that actually that has a broader sense of support across the town than any one constituency of any one of those groups.
Yeah, as passionate as each would be for just
Right.
what they wanted, I
Right.
think you could do a Venn diagram where you could pull enough groups together to go, wow, there's,
Right.
not perfect, I don't get my Taj Mahal,
Right.
14 courts and everything, but we got something good that a lot of people in town can benefit from. So that's what was encouraging about the feedback that came from this. And also, you know, it is what we heard sort of in the townwide master plan. So, and I think Lauren did a nice job of sort of creating this survey that pushed it a little bit more, okay, where are you actually going to put your dollars? So more work to come out of this, but it does give us some direction that there could be a Venn diagram where these come together, where one facility could do 65% of what a lot of people want, as opposed to 100% of what a smaller niche wants. And then I wait in line for my building. When do I get my building, right?
Right.
So I think that's a great point. The next slide just touched on CPA, and all this tells us, and I'm sorry, Frank, if I can have the next slide.
yep.
No problem. Basically, this was a, you know, 1 is strongly disagree, 5 is strongly agree. We threw out 3 statements. I'm familiar with the Community Preservation Act. Lo and behold, if 3 is neutral, 2.4 means most people are leaning towards disagree. They don't know what it is. And so this would be an education anyway for the entire town, would take a lot of effort, but you know, could very well be worth it. And then when you asked, I'm interested in learning more about it, well, they lean towards, yeah, I'll at least be willing to hear it. And then should we explore participating in as an additional, you know, source of funding, they lean towards it as well. And this was without any education, you know, there was simply a question at the end of the survey that asked these questions. So I think at least uncovers that there's a willingness to learn more, to have a dialogue, and find out, you know, sort of what's happening in this area and revisit it. The last slide I'll show is actually the next one, which, you know, and I know I said I'm not trying to do a commercial, but this is what you guys said, which is, you know, if you put a 1% surcharge on that 12,962, you remove the 100,000 from your property tax that you can exclude, that's $114, you know, for the average home. That gets us $600,000 in CPA funding. If you do the 3%, you get 1.8. And, you know, again, lots to have a discussion on, but that's certainly one of the takeaways is we have some money on the table we should at least explore. And Gus, I think it's a creative solution to say, well, if you're going to spend 1.8 million and you're going to tax fund it, why not consider reducing the taxes? And I think that's a creative solution that, you know, as a town we should look at as part of the discussion. So, so at this point, all I want to do, there's going to be a bonus round, which I'm going to quickly, Frank, you might cramp up on this. Just we're going to hit them fast. Number 2, CPA eligible. Expand parks and active recreation. We could use CPA. Next slide. Believe it or not, action 3 could be CPA eligible. So again, a lot of what you're going to see, this is the list and the details underneath it. And I would say again, It's a very detailed action plan. So if you look at it, there's specific recommendations. There's a maintenance plan for our conservation, sort of a checklist, what should be done every year. And then, one of the, the positions or one of the things that we're saying, and it does come out in this plan, is to look at increasing a full-time equivalent of 0.5 to actually manage and coordinate this. So I know we're looking at, for Concom, potentially going full-time where we could hire someone full-time. Half their job would be to shepherd this through. Because we still have the same problem on this, that there are a lot of recommendations for a lot of different departments, but there's some gray areas and someone has to wake up every day and worry about it. And I look at what Concom is trying to do right now with the number of things we've got going on, to ask them, oh, by the way, do an annual maintenance plan on all this stuff. I'm not sure we have the resources internally. But the other big recommendation here is to engage more actively with the volunteer organizations and the organizations like trustees that all benefit from this, to be able to do a better job of coordinating. Because there's a lot. I mean, George, again, spent all this time putting 35 pages together on the conservation places, or not just conservation, all of our land. There are people that passionate about it, but they just don't know where to volunteer. They don't know who to volunteer with. And obviously, Christian Donner in the rail trail. There are people here, if they were given a direction, guidance, and there was someone in town who could spearhead it so it's not chaos, that I think we could leverage a lot of free resources, which is people who just love the town and want to do more. So that's pretty much all we have right now. Yes, there are many pages. Encourage you, but I can see Gus already has some questions. Please forward them. You can send them. Send them to me. Send them to Sarah. Well, not Sarah.
I brought a copy of the excerpt
You can do that.
for you.
I take that as well. So
Small forest over there.
Yeah, I have one copy. If either of you want a hard copy, if you prefer an electronic copy, you can do it. But I did bring one extra copy, and I brought one for you, Frank.
okay. I killed an iPad. So
So, yeah, so, well, anyway, so this is yours. The bad part about PDFs is that, unlike Word, where you can go track changes, and it's sort of electronic, I had two things I could do. One was highlight things in yellow. So what you'll see in this is a combination, the yellow highlights are a combination of intriguing points that were made that I just found interesting.
Yep.
Minor wordsmithing, editorial, grammatical errors.
Good.
And then some real issues. And then the other thing you can do is put text in. And so I've inserted, these are the pages that actually had at least highlighting. Most of them have text where I inserted questions, comments.
That's great.
Recognize the stuff you see at the front. If I asked a question that you go, well, it's in the plan. I didn't go through this twice.
Yep,
I went through it from the start, put down stream of consciousness. If you probably just look at what I put in here, which tends to be more the critical questions, you say you didn't like the plan. I did like the plan.
Yep.
It was just I didn't put a lot of time into saying, there were a couple places I said, interesting idea, good idea,
Yep.
but it's not balanced. It's the things that I snagged on that I've commented on.
That's what we're looking for right now.
I took for the first 4 sections, I read the whole thing.
Mhm.
So some of the summary stuff at the end I skipped through. I didn't literally read the description of every item that's, I did look to see if you had Devil's Foot Island, just to see if it was complete, and I found it, so I know it was. Or at least I was comfortable that it was. But the basic text I went through, I would actually highly recommend people read the first 4 sections.
It's great.
Because it's the way my head works, probably the most intriguing section there was the discussion of the geological makeup of Medfield. Who knew I didn't know there was a Lake Medfield before, in the glacial period. Well,
Heavy
you did.
water.
And I gather that's how, I always wonder why certain brooks that you drive by, Trap Hole Brook, Mine Brook, why did that brook go there? And it's like, it answered that question for me. Well, it went there when the dam broke on the glacial Lake Medfield, so that's what started it there, and then it just stayed there. So I thought that was cool. I found it interesting, the 38% number, open space, I never knew exactly what it was. I knew it was a lot. That is a lot. And I think it was 35% that are on the sewer system. I would have guessed it was only a third or a quarter of the town that was not. So I was genuinely surprised to learn that most people are not on Medfield's sewer system. That caught me. So there were some little things like that I really liked. First point, I think you got Bill's comments. You haven't, if you would forward those. So I agree with all of Bill's comments in the email that maybe, I thought you'd send it to everybody, but if you can send it to him, I totally agree with all of his comments.
Okay.
So that's, which is more concise than this thing. I had,
I can give a quick summary, just 4 things basically at the end of this. I'll
Sure.
mention it.
That's why we're here.
I would, without being critical, I would make the observation that in this plan, like many of the plans we have, it identifies itself as aspirational and talks about this is what people want without having considered resource constraints. So for me, that's not exactly an actionable plan. That's not as much of the pink puppies and unicorns plan as I have sometimes accused other plans in this town of being. But it has that quality to it. I can live with it. It's just, what it does is it makes, it's not like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. What it says is this is another plan that's kind of saying, this is kind of like what we were thinking about doing, and I'm good with that. But
So,
that's
if I can, I would slightly disagree. I think there's more
there is.
more specifics here.
Yep.
Specificity,
Yep.
yes. And it's natural because from a planning process, we went from the master plan for the state hospital had a specific purpose. The townwide master plan sort of was a blueprint. And now each plan that's coming out is derivative of that and more specific to move something ahead. It doesn't mean that it's the detailed blueprint,
Right.
but it starts to prioritize. And there are resources that are associated, complexity, number of years that are associated with those for, honestly, Park and Rec, Concom, the committees in town to start making decisions and the town to decide where we want to put some resources.
The assessments of the individual assets, I like that a lot. That was one of those places, the place that I was pleasantly surprised was in the last couple of objectives that have to do with maintenance.
Yes.
Those actually were pretty specific.
Very
There's some-
specific.
There's some open-ended issues.
Here's an annual plan. Here's what we have to
Yeah.
do. Here's, if you
It's not
started
cl-
January 1.
Right. It's not clear to me DPW is the right place. I'm not even sure that anybody's made the decision. DPW has the responsibility for maintaining the rail trail, because I don't think we've had that discussion, so I'm not sure who else would actually do that. And I'm skeptical they're the right ones at a time when people are pushing for road repairs and sidewalks. And then the alternative of Parks and Rec that talked about, well, you gotta fund it, but that followed a few paragraphs that said, well, actually, the maintenance of this open space is pretty, it's a low effort.
Yep.
So we just have to figure that out.
Yeah, there is some air traffic control that has to happen. It
Yeah.
doesn't
Yep.
have all the answers, but it has
Yep.
a pretty good set of questions to ask that we have to come to terms with. If we say we're serious about this,
Right.
we're going to have to start putting some resources, not just money, time and coordination.
Right.
And if it's scattered through 5 or 6 different departments in town, it's going to be really hard to do it.
Another place that I reacted to, and again, it's not a problem, but it might be useful for the committee to be thinking about this. Some of the objectives here of adding recreational things, like pickleball courts,
Yep.
those are not needs of the community. Those might be requested amenities.
Yep.
But for me, I differentiate the things that we need as a town versus certain things that certain people in town would like to have for themselves. And then for me, that always comes down to, so how are we gonna pay for that one? Because it's probably not everybody. So I had that reaction, not that pickleball I am a little bit, only because I don't think we wanna get cross-threaded with commercial
Yep.
like Kingsbury. But the basic idea that people in town say they want they want something we don't have.
Yep.
Willing to entertain it, it's just that if it's a discretionary, this would be fun.
Yep.
It's like, well, I'd like to have a clear indication from the taxpayers across the board that they want to pay for that fund, or an alternative, which is, or have it funded elsewhere. And beyond the CPA, the plan actually did call out the idea that for some of this stuff, perhaps you raise money from those people who would like to contribute to it. And I think that's, especially for those kinds of things, I think that's a good way to go. So,
Personally, I'm a believer in, I think that I was president of youth baseball and softball, and we raised money to do a field because why are you asking a senior to put a field down, right, a turf field, raise the money. If the support's there and the community wants to do it, let the people.
Right.
And then there's things that are like a community center that a lot of people would, and you're competing for those resources. So I tend to be more on that side as well.
And there was one last thing. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here, but the highlights. I couldn't, for some reason, when I was reading it, I was looking at the affordable housing issue. There's actually two things. There's one other one on it. The affordable housing issue, and I couldn't tell from the tone of the plan whether it was many of the things we say we need to do are things that we're already doing, like fixing the Hinckley playground.
Yep.
That's actually ongoing.
Yep.
We're developing the state hospital. Yes, we are.
Yep.
It's in the plan. I understand why, but it's underway. The affordable housing piece, for some reason, when I read how that was addressed in the plan, I couldn't tell whether it was the comments were in the context of achieving 40B, recognizing that based on Sarah's inputs, when the state hospital is developed, we'll be at 17%
Yep.
affordable. And I'm saying, I don't think we need a lot more affordable housing plans and priorities when we're at that kind of a number, particularly in a town that's expensive.
Yep.
And when you bring people in affordable housing, chances are they're not the ones that we would expect would contribute their full fair share for what it costs to run everything. So that was just a subjective reaction.
Yeah, and I think on that, Gus, it comes down that we don't know this is all going to happen. So
Yeah.
as best we can right now.
Yeah.
But similar to what happened when the townwide master plan, we kept saying, boy, that state hospital, hope something happens.
Right.
Hope it happens. It hadn't yet. So now that Trinity and Belforge are moving ahead, we have a little bit more clarity on the next steps. And I think that's going to be the case with the affordable housing as well.
My last subjective reaction is, in reading through it, was at the very early part of the plan, it says that we have no environmental justice communities here. And then we have a whole bunch of stuff later on that talks about equity. We're a town looking for a victim to find that we can help. And to me, I would stay away from the political jargon because it's a lightning rod, because it implies something. You use the word equity, it ties to socialism. And
So
when
let me-
you use redistribution, it ties to socialism.
So you're going to love Massachusetts again. Part of these are required as part of
Well,
these documents.
I assume
So-
that was, so what happened, but what was interesting is, so I had that reaction. It's a lightning rod reaction that says, okay, here we go. But then when you actually talk to, and the comment you'll see in here is I said, look, if we have an issue here, tell me the concrete specific issue, because I'm not coming from the standpoint that I think some people in this town, if you can't access open space, too bad for you. I have my walking, it's not that. It's that we should want to make sure everybody can do it, but I'm not convinced we have circumstances here. The part that said public transportation, it's like people in this town do not need public transportation to get to open space. You could mostly go out your back door, turn left or right and walk a quarter mile and you've got access to it. So that's what I was reacting to. The one thing though, that when I got farther into it, the one group that was the underserved group you focused in on was actually seniors.
Yep.
And so it was like, well, in practical terms, what the plan talked about was trying to make sure that seniors can take full advantage. And it's like, well, I don't have a problem with that. I don't think people should underestimate what seniors are capable of, but I don't have a problem with that. I did react to the jargon.
I will tell you, and you can see it in the section on feedback from the public.
Mm-hmm.
There were, I'm not going to say a tidal wave, but there were a number of comments from seniors who felt and were worried this was all going to be about active recreation, and most of the things that are sort of being posted on social media about, like, we need this, and this, and they just wanted to make sure that their voice was heard on it. And I won't do it as good service as if Wayne, the consultant, was here. But there's, I don't want to say formulaic, but there are things we have to cover in this, and those themes are part of what we have to submit.
So you'll see my comment. It's not. I assume that was the case because of the structure.
Yep.
You'll see my comments about the words that we actually used, and it's like, what's this? I did get to the end, and it's like, okay, I'm looking for concrete. I concrete understand what the heck you're talking about. And what came out toward the end was, no, what we're really talking about in this town is seniors. And it's like, okay, but
And there also are,
I feel better about making sure that it's available to everybody regardless of who you are.
That's the
Now,
key.
if you make a case that somebody who's here can't connect very well, I'm all in favor of us doing something about
Yep.
that. It's the rhetoric that kind of feels like it's, you know, it's text in search of a problem to solve. And we said at the start, we don't have this particular problem. So it's a subjective reaction to
Yep.
the words.
And I do think, you know, the ADA, we need to have the ADA
Yeah.
issues addressed. They came back, the state came back with concerns about it. And we do have, you can see it in pictures from different sites in the ADA plan of not a heavy amount of money to be spent to make things more accessible.
I thought you actually handled that issue pretty well in here, in that you talked about it, but then my story that I have in my head is apparently the wheelchair accessible site at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, at the bottom of the Burro Trail down there, because federal law requires it. And it's like, somebody got on a donkey and went all the way down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Yeah,
that's
I know. And it was, so that's the part I'm sensitive. I actually thought what you wrote about it was fine, because it wasn't like we're gonna make every trail in Medfield, you know, wheelchair wide and board it, you know, it sounded fine to me.
Yeah, and we have, I think everyone will agree who's walked the trails, we have some, and the select board has talked about this, we have some existing facilities that just need to be taken care of.
Yeah.
And that alone will give more accessibility.
Yeah.
But then there are some real issues that have to be addressed, so. Other comments, questions?
No, I was coming tonight to just get a better understanding as to where you were with this. I appreciate the fact that, like, you didn't put numbers, because I had a feeling it was still somewhat draft.
Yep.
People were chiming, so I intend to, I love the comments you put in. So you can either take this, Pete, if you want, or I'll take whatever works best for you.
And I can send electronic out. I'll forward the electronic copy to you, and anybody that wants it can
Yeah,
have
if
it.
you actually, the electronic copy would actually
Yeah.
probably be easy for me to read, because I can just
Yeah.
pop it on my.
Yeah, if you could send your electronic copy to all of us, Gus, that would
Yeah.
be good.
But I
Yeah.
think this is super helpful, because
Yeah.
you've been involved with this longer than I have. I just got brought into this, I think we started talking about it last June. So I love where the detail in this is amazing. I love learning certain areas of town.
Good story of Medfield. After History Week, you know, your weekend, you get a little more percolation.
But no, I think this has been a good dialogue. I don't want to bury it.
Just understand that I was doing stream of consciousness, looking at the things that I snagged on, so
Yes,
it's
I've
not a
attended
balance
meetings,
thing.
I know. And this is the stage to do it, and that's why I didn't want to wait until the end of the month, because I assumed that there would be some need to kind of get this. The same thing happened with Park and Rec. We met with them 3 or 4 weeks ago, answered some questions, they had a chance to then read it, came back, they all read it, and they had some comments. And we're doing the same thing with Concom, so totally understandable. You know, I think the nice news about it is there is a whole bunch of agreement on what the priorities are. They keep coming out in every survey we do. This puts a little bit more action to it. And then the only thing is just, you know, to make sure we can try to get a conclusion to this so we can submit it, because time is money.
What towns around us have signed on to this, the CPA?
I
think Holliston.
Holliston has, for sure. Yeah, Holliston
did.
did. I think Millis has just done it as well. I have to take a look at that.
I'd be
Medway
intrigued.
did, because Mark Sorrell is part of their CPA community. They signed on at the beginning
Yeah.
when the match was 100% from the state. So
Yep.
Mark said that they got a ton of money.
But they have, you know, and I looked at it 6 or 7 weeks ago, and then, you know, with everything else, there is ample information there to be able to dig into this, and again, and have good, healthy debate and arguments about it. I mean, that's the way we should do it, because it's, you know, it's not a slam dunk. The money's there, but there are consequences, and you just have to make sure you think them through. And the more we can hear from all sides to be able to come out with a good solution for it, the better.
There's no point in doing it if we're not already spending the money on the 3 pots that you have to put the money into, but we are,
Yep.
as you enumerate in your material.
Yeah, and I just didn't go through the rest of the slides. Literally every one of these actions has at least partial CPA, you know, so, and there's actually in the plan, if you look at, I think it's page 107, see if I'm that good at remembering it.
Where your list is?
Yeah, so 107,
108.
108 goes through the specific projects that would have gotten funding if we had CPA of real money we've spent.
Yeah, going back to 2008.
Yeah,
and
so-
there may be 20 of them on your list, it looks like.
Yep, and we know the ones that are coming up, so, great. Thank you for the
Thanks, Jerry.
feedback.
So in general, my reaction was that it was it was like a wish list. It was a very expansive list of things. And because there are no prices on any of it, it's, you know, it's not intended as an actual roadmap of what we're doing next. It's just a list of things to consider.
I think there's both time and complexity that it would take. So there is some attempt to prioritize the effort that would take to go behind these things.
Yep, but and there should be some thinking that goes into that, like for me, the connections in the town are really important, because we want to be able to get people around so kids can get on their bikes and get to the downtown from anywhere in town and safely. You can't do that at the moment from the north side of town because of Harding Street being a problem.
Yep.
For the safety issues, so that, that would be one of my priorities. The signage on the trails is a big one for me, because I think that's easy to solve. That's very inexpensive. Good trail map is important. I don't know that we have a good GIS
Oh, we
trail map,
definitely don't.
unfortunately.
And those are things with the apps that are out there today, easy if we can ourselves determine what, and that's where I think George's really comes in, that 35
I was disappointed
pages.
to see that somebody was saying recently that the best trail map in Medfield is the Medfield Forest and Trails Association, which hasn't been updated for
Yeah.
probably 10 or 20 years or something like that.
Well, part of the reason that George did that work was because he's a rabid trail guy. He's using them all, and these are his observations going through it. And so that 35 pages, I'd take a look at that as, I know, well, you're looking at the whole thing, but those pages that I outlined for that second part of the inventory that he worked on, I think makes it a little more user-friendly. You're not looking at lot 21 and it's under, there's this big, you're actually seeing the piece of, I know that piece of property. And he does a pretty good assessment of sort of what the good, the bad, and the ugly is for each of them, so.
Good.
But I think it's the start. I don't, to your point, I don't think we're, similar to the townwide master plan, it led to doing things like wayfaring and we've used that to do some work coming out of the plan. I think there's the same thing, just more focused on park rec, conservation, and open space.
So the housing, the reference for the affordable housing kind of struck me as odd that it was in this, but, that it is what it is, so.
Well, it's an important part. If you don't do it right, you lose open space because you can't control it. So it is linked. You have less control if you're out of safe harbor to stop open space from being consumed. I think that was the reason it was in there.
Yeah, okay. In terms of the timing, I think that you want to get this off next month, apparently.
End of the
That might
month.
be aggressive. I don't know if we're going to respond that quickly, or your other committees.
Well, we already have two.
Yeah, I
so
know it
we're
hasn't
ready-
been to Concom yet, so.
We've tried. We've been sending that. We've been trying to get on that docket for a while. We've sent the documents multiple times. We're hoping CAT is on that committee, has presented it. They talked about it briefly at the last. They're perhaps the biggest beneficiaries of having this plan, because right now we can't qualify for.
Well, and one of the biggest problems has been that the town hasn't invested in maintaining the properties that the Concom is supposed to be
Totally correct.
maintaining and controlling for the town. So
You'll
that-
notice one of the money recommendations there is to fund a full-time.
One of the things that I did as a new selectman years ago was to try to get the town to spend some money on the ponds, because the ponds are getting overgrown with milfoil, and we actually spent some money, and you can't just throw poison, apparently. That's not the solution. You actually have to pull the stuff up if you want long-term success, and so we spent some money for a couple of years, and then budgets got tight and we stopped spending. So it's a question for the residents as to what they're gonna spend to maintain what we have. And that's always gonna be a problem, as to how much more can we do, because everybody's feeling very taxed already, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the discussion that's in the plan that goes through the details of what an annual plan would look like, that's great. The recommendation also says have a half FTE that is dedicated to actually making sure this stuff happens. Because that right now, it's a part of a lot of people's jobs. And
I happen to hear a lot about the Conservation Commission because of the people that live in my house.
is that true?
And I can tell you that, that from what I hear, they actually need a full-time conservation agent without adding this to, and so it becomes it's a town budget
It's a
issue.
town, 100%. At least there's something in here that says they should have more control over it. They should have more resources. We as a town, I mean, again, it's one thing to say this is your number one or number two priority. At some point, it comes to how do you fund it? and CPA could be a good way, again, to alleviate some of the pain. So
Well,
all
so-
that comes out of this is a lot of work, to be honest. But if people care about this stuff, at least it will be focused work, because what's happening now is even this plan that got shelved 2019 was being done by a group of volunteers, part-time, trying to get it through, best of intentions, put in a ton of work, and we didn't get across the finish line. So I think somewhere in here, we're going to have to get, again, that Venn diagram where resources come together, people come together, and then we're giving them a process and a framework of how they could work together. Because there are volunteers who want to do it, but if everyone's kind of doing it off on their own or different committees are doing it, it's probably not going to get done.
You just said something that prompted something. First off, they did get it to the finish line dated November 2021, because that was what I first asked about here. So the only question I had, did your committee look at the deficiencies that the
Yes.
states had? So we've
100%.
addressed all of those?
Oh,
Okay.
100%. And a large part of them were the ADA
Yeah,
issues,
okay.
right?
Okay.
So, there were others, minimal ones, but there was a lot that we had to go through. So, it was the first place we started, was taking a look at the existing, all the existing documents, and also there was some really good work done in that. It just needed to answer the state on their deficiencies that came up, and we'll have some too. They're going to come back. I mean, it's their job is to come back with some things that aren't right. So even if we approve it, I'm sure there'll still be some discussions that are going to take place. But we learned a lot from that, and I think we're in a pretty good place. The consultant we used, again, I can't say it enough. Wayne did a phenomenal job. He turned around, got the goals from Brittany, 4 o'clock yesterday, had them in the plan and posted, within an hour. So we'll be responsive to whatever comments come in, and if we have questions, we might need to come back. But short of that, Mr. Mazzaro.
Bill, did you want to make
Pete,
a?
I would just make one thing with the schedule, speaking as one select on the select board. From what I've seen, from my perspective, I think it is feasible for you to have this done by June. I have a lot of comments, but they're nuts and bolts comments, and to the point that this is not a contractual firm fixed plan, where you took it, what's in it, shows thought, has a lot of good information in it. I personally don't think usually I'm probably the one that would be more likely to snag a plan up than anyone else based on recent track record. I don't anticipate that I would have the kind of heartburn between now and June. Now, I'm hoping you'll listen to some of this stuff.
Absolutely.
But I don't think I'll have the kind of heartburn that would cause it, at least me, to be a stumbling block to getting that thing done by.
Well, and that's why I didn't want
Right.
to, there was some recommendation of coming after all the other committees that met and commissions that met and voted, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. You guys are the ones chartering us, so we should come in now and get the feedback. Seems crazy, and then give us a chance to respond to it. And then in conjunction with that, we'll let you know, Concom in particular and the ADA are the two that, we have to get in. I'm fairly certain our committee will vote yes on this, so I think we'll approve it, I'm pretty sure, so.
Bill, do you want to make your comments now?
Yeah, just a quick summary. So they're kind of like in 4 categories. I first want to say that I made some comments on the first pass through this. It was a couple of months ago, maybe 2 months, 3 months ago, or whatever. And I started those out with complimenting all the work that had been done, the detail that was in there, and everything else. Very impressive. It was recognizably a ton of work has gone into this, and it's probably one of the most comprehensive things I've read, about the town, about the physical characteristics and everything else. So I mean,
I think it's a town. Sarah and Wayne did a great job.
Yeah, it's a great job. How I typically approach these things, particularly when the mention of the hospital is made or anything about the hospital. So the majority of my categories are comments there. So the first one again is that the environmental discussions. You go into sustainability, you go into the impact on environment, climate change, and everything else. There's practically nothing on the town's efforts to create the overlook. I'm not talking about fighting with the state or anything else, which was, of course, was the major challenge, and we're still fighting with them and everything else. But the fact of the matter is that we did accomplish something, and I make a comment about what the town spent, how many thousands of hours that the town and volunteers spent on this and everything else. And there's about 2 sentences on the parking and the scenic views. So, I mean, I had the same comment, by the way, on the town-wide master plan.
Okay.
I mean, we really sold ourselves short here. I mean, it was a long, hard-fought battle to get this thing done, and there's nothing like it in the Upper Charles River Valley. And there's enough public information about it. Charles River, when they opened it in October of 2015 or whatever, there was all kinds of articles they wrote and everything else. There's enough information there to at least put in a paragraph about, you know, what was done
Good
there.
feedback.
All right. There are a couple of misstatements about the property and the development, very minor.
Okay.
The most important one is there is no well on the hospital property.
Mm.
This is the second time I made that comment, so I mean, it's,
Yeah, it's town.
in
yeah.
fact, you know, at the Trinity discussion, they had mentioned, you know, well, maybe we can use the well up there. No, there's no well there. And I
That's a
think it's
good
just a
catch.
confusion with the tubular well field, which is not at the hospital
I think that's
property.
exactly what it is. Yeah, that's a good call, which can't be used, so.
At the very end, there's a comment about increasing the recreational opportunities at the hospital. And it's not clear what physically is there to even be, you know, increased.
Yep.
So I asked some questions about, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? What field? What are you talking about? And I did ask a question about Article 97, which talks about the state giving you money to purchase land and everything else. The state already owns all the other land up there.
Yep.
So, I mean, I have a
Yeah, it's legit. Yeah,
fairly
very aware
long
of it.
question there.
Yep.
And then the last item, I guess, is the language around equity, dominant culture, global South, New Americans, and everything else. I mean, it's just, especially when I sit and I look through the rest of the article, I see, my first thought was, well, okay, when they're talking about equities and people need to have access, equitable access to the property and everything else, my first thought was you're talking about ADA, you're talking about, and that was well addressed with all of the shortcomings in ADA and everything else. By the way, the kayak launch supposedly is ADA accessible.
Okay.
You might, double
double
check
check
that
that.
with this. Have them call the state and ask, because
Okay.
that was one of the things that was great, the relinking
One
of
of
the
the
Charles
one at
River
the
Link Trail.
hospital.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was supposedly,
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure, I
Not
would,
the wheelchair at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
well,
but
it's good.
it's-
No, but in
No,
fairness,
but-
depending on the water level, I can see how it is, because there's those stones there. It's a
Yeah.
ramp into the
Right.
water.
Yeah, yeah.
So as long as the river's not down too far.
so again, there's more there to take advantage of. So, but again, I did have some comments. I assumed, as Gus did, that there were things that had to be in there to satisfy the state and everything else. But after we've gone through the fact that there were no environmental inequities, you know, who doesn't have access, regardless of religion, race, creed, culture, or whatever, now or in the future in Medfield, does not have the same access to these open spaces? There is nothing that I can think of that's, you know, barred or any restrictions. So
I would just say, and I'm Switzerland on this, you know, just on we're trying to gather, you know, the feedback is, in large degree, it's an opportunity if there are groups that feel that they don't have access, or it's not equitable, you know, that
well,
they
then
can-
we're certainly receptive to any comments along those lines.
yeah, and that's,
But I mean, it just smacked to me of that these situations already exist here, and we're going to do things to that kind of like,
You know what
a
bothers me
first
about it,
impression.
Jerry, is that everybody has to conform to a rhetoric of expression. And when people do that, they stop paying attention to what might really be there. That's the thing that drives me nuts, is okay, we all say the mantra, that means we're sensitive. And it's like, no, it doesn't mean that at all. There's things in this town that are not at the level that would show up on that kind of a radar screen that we can get better at.
Yep.
And that's the stuff that I want to actually see us truly go after, but everybody's so busy with the mantra.
Yep.
And once you've said it, then, well, we've covered that. and I'm not blaming you guys. I believe you. It's the state. Here's the
well,
prescribed.
we saw it with the MBTA communities
Right.
about
It
sort
drives
of,
me
you know,
nuts.
so this is the reality of sort of, if we're filing this with the state to get grants,
Yeah.
we're going to have to be sensitive to, things that not everyone's going to agree on.
Right.
And, but should always be able to talk about
Right.
and be listened to. So I see, I certainly understand what you're saying. Can you send that email?
I'll give you a copy of it, and then I can send you, if you'd
Sounds
like,
great.
electronic copy.
Electronic would be a little easier because I'm going to have to,
I'll give you this one.
it's not like I'm going to do it, it's Wayne is going to do it.
I'll give you this, so you can digest it, too.
Oh, I
as
want to
well.
read it, but I'm just saying for us to be able to
understand. I'll
act on
send
it
it tonight
and
when I get
digest it, that'd be great.
And I would say I was one of the prime objectors to the original CPA, namely because of the requirements to X percent had to go here, Y percent had to go someplace else, everything else. We had already satisfied some of those requirements. That was probably my main objection. I'll be interested in any new information that you can
Yeah,
provide.
it's a different program. I'm not saying it's the right program, but it's certainly a lot of the concerns I heard from Mike Marcucci years ago. A lot of those are no longer the case. So, you know, and again, facing what we're looking at right now with a pretty daunting dance card of potential projects that fit it, at least to explore it. And the towns, like, no one's leaving it. So once they're in, there haven't been towns that have said, oh, darn, if anything, they've increased it because they have a lot of the same issues that we're dealing with. So, but I'll get you actual numbers and data behind that as opposed to just pontificating or pontificating.
Well, and again, I've got somewhere in the next 2 weeks, I'll have a session with the folks from Charles River, because they followed up with me because of the questions comments I had when they came. And it's like, well, no, you said it was different. You're offering to explain it to me. I'm quite, if there's a good way we can get more money on this stuff, then I will suddenly go from being the skeptic to someone who'll do my best to explain to people why it makes sense. I just have to be convinced it makes sense. I'm not there yet, but I've heard it's different. So it's like,
Yep.
okay, that helps.
Worth having the discussion.
Yeah.
And mostly just thank you for the support in pushing ahead with this and reading and slogging through it. I know it's a lot of pages to go through. If you have questions beyond this, don't hesitate to reach out. And
Thanks
shoot
to
an
your
email.
committee and you for all of the work. It clearly is a ton of work that you guys did, so thank you.
It's a good group.
Do
and
we have another
Sarah.
question or not, Chris?
No, I have the map up if you want to know what the towns are that have the CPA, if you're curious.
I think we're all set then. Thanks, Jerry. So our next
I thought
action.
she was going to ask the tough question of me.
Our next item is Sarah proposal to request acceptance of local action unit application, which is the equivalent of a affordable housing submission for the Medfield State Hospital redevelopment project.
So Sarah's unable to make it tonight, but I'll be happy to speak to the memo that she had distributed earlier today, and happy to follow up on any specifics. And I know she was excited to put this together for
Another massive amount of
Right.
material.
So what we're asking for tonight is for you to approve the request that we'll be sending over to the local action unit for the 4 different developments to be added to the town's subsidized housing inventory. So as it stands right now, the town's total SHI or subsidized housing inventory units total 384. Our 2010 year-round housing units in the town are 4,220, bringing us to a percentage of 9.1%, and we're trying to reach that threshold of 10.
So I had a quick question for you.
Sure.
In the email, she called out the state hospital clearly when it comes online, pushes up to 17%. We're using the 2010 census that you just quoted, although apparently the state will be going to the new one at the end of this month. The other 3 items, I think one of them dropped off, she said, because the permit had gone beyond the 2 years, which says that didn't help us with the safe harbor, but it sounded like she was saying the 3 projects that weren't the state hospital, for some reason, had been dropped off the inventory, but they were going to be added back on. If you add it back on, we're not at that 9.5%. We're actually over the 10%.
Correct. That's my understanding as well, but I'll be happy to follow up.
So bottom line is, for what we actually have for real projects that have been approved, we actually are at 10% against the 2010 census. That will get us through the end of this month in terms of actually meeting the requirement. But then when it goes up to 4450, I think she had in it,
For at the end of this month.
then we might still be a few short, because I think when I did the math, I came out to enough to be above 10% at the 2010 number, but not enough to be at 10% on the 2020 number.
And I'll double check that with
I
her.
have it in my mind that we're about 8 short, something of that magnitude.
Where's that group home when you need it?
And when do we get the credit for the Medfield State Hospital units? Is that when they're permitted?
I believe when they're correct, when they're permitted.
It's different than the usual 40B, because that gets credited when it's permitted by the ZBA.
Oh, that'll be the case for this one though, too, right?
Pardon?
This is still a ZBA permit. They don't have any permits yet.
Right. They've got a special permit from the planning board.
That's probably, yeah, but they don't have their construction permits.
Right.
But I think the schedule is
I think they have to
June.
pull a building permit for us to get credit for it.
So we vote on it, we're just,
Yes, so we'll need a vote to submit that, or for Sarah to submit that to DHCD. She lays it out, I think, pretty clearly, the units that'll be added via those 4 developments, most notably the 334 for the Trinity project at the State Hospital. And as Gus mentioned, by the end of this month, we should have updated census numbers. And when you incorporate the added units, the total that we'd be looking at is about 17%.
Any questions? Gus?
Nope.
Eileen?
no, I'm good.
I'm good too. So a motion then, Eileen?
I motion that we accept Sarah's request for the local action unit application submission for the Medfield State Hospital redevelopment project.
Second?
All those in favor? Second.
Well, that was a
Oh, I
question
thought you
if you had a
were-
second.
That's-
All those in
Second.
favor? Aye.
Aye.
All
I'm
right.
flexible here.
Glad you're willing to do anything to make it work. Action items. We're holding on the appointment of the deputy chief. Is that still right?
Yes.
And
For anybody who's paying attention, that's an administrative hold, not a decision hold, if
Exactly.
anybody cares.
yeah, and there's we're looking to hire as deputy chief someone named Barry McGrath, he's coming from which department, Frank?
Rentham.
Rentham. Next item is a vote for the following request from Memo relating to the 2023 Discover Medfield Day, Saturday, September 23, to hold the event from 10 to 4. Permission to use the town-owned land around Meeting House Pond and portions of North Prairie and Upham Road. Permission for a small amount of assistance in undertaking the event, which is the DPW does a fair amount of work helping them to make it happen. Approval of a town common victualer's license and waiver of the $50 application fee, and permission to hang their banner across Route 109 around August 19 through the event, so a little over a month. Any information on this from anybody? Questions or comments?
No, we know they do a good job. This is punches from right through.
Do we have a motion then?
Okay, motion that we vote on approve the request from Memo relating to the 2023 Discover Medfield Day, planned to be held on Saturday, September 23rd.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm always interested that they call it Discover Medfield Day and everybody else calls it Medfield Day. Consent agenda, we've got a request from the COA to move their one-day beer and license permit from the May 17 to May 18. Request from the Zulu Gallery for a one-day beer wine permit for a special stand-up comedy event at the gallery on Thursday, May 11 from 5:30 to 11. Request from the Norfolk Hunt Club for a one-day beer and wine permit for the biannual Grounds for Celebration fundraiser on Thursday, May 25 from 6 to 11. And finally, the request from the Friends of the Dwight Derby House for a one-day wine and beer permit for the Samba Jazz Project Band on Saturday, June 3 from 6 to 10, and request to place a sandwich board at the corner of North and Main from May 31 to June 3, advertising. Do we have a motion on all those? Any questions?
No questions, I think I'm good, those make sense. You good? All right, motion, do you want me to read those again, or just motion to accept the consent agenda?
We have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Let's try to save a little time here.
So, on the
He's the
meeting,
master. He just says, so moved.
on the meeting minutes, I haven't had a chance to look at those, so if we can just hold off on those. Frank, anything on the town administrator updates?
I have no updates, no.
Okay. And how about, next meeting is May 23. Gus, do you have anything to report to the town?
I think the only thing I have to report is that we had the State Hospital Development Committee meeting last night. Quick meeting, like 12 minutes. Took me more time to get here in person for what I learned was a Zoom meeting. But it was about a 12-minute meeting to provide support for the MassWorks application that Trinity's putting in. So we didn't have to do anything about that here, but the Development Committee is back their applications. Well-written letter that Todd drafted pointing out the criticality of state support for the infrastructure needs up at the state hospital. So
Okay.
we're all doing what we can to row the boat here to get this project through. I think
Okay.
that's it.
Eileen?
All right, I got a variety of things here. So, had a chance since our last meeting, I've been up to Bell Forge a couple of times. There's been a variety of concerts. They had the Ferry House. So I'm thrilled for Jean and her whole team. It looks like they're off to another great season. I had a chance to sit in the Chiefs meeting that she had a week ago, Friday. So the morning of no, actually, it was on April 28th. So it was the Friday before the prom, where she held a little round table. She had Michelle and she had Officer, I'm gonna draw a blank on which officer sat next to me. But we had a chance to talk to some of the parents about the law that's changed about host parties. And it was like, to cut to the quick, what I thought was really impressive is really good dialogue. And, there's no gray area, right? So, I mean, as the chief has said many times over, they're here to serve and protect. The police officer that was there, was very adamant about wanting to make sure that the parents and the kids, if anything should go sideways, the police are there to get those kids home. They're not there to just get them in any form of trouble. So it was a really good conversation, but they passed out a pamphlet that to me just struck home with basically the average civil lawsuit is an $8.2 million settlement. So the conversation was, you can choose to do something crazy, but if you do and you get sued, and it's not covered by most homeowners insurance. So it's just a really good conversation, knowing that we're leading up to prom being last Friday, graduation's coming up in a few weeks, and it was good attendance, so it was very nice. And I will say, I did the baseball and softball parade. Took one for the team.
I'm 0 for 2. I'm 0 for 2. But
Jerry
this
saw me
time-
going through town.
This time, I showed up at 3:45 at Blake, and there was nobody there. And it had just started to rain a little bit. And I go, these big babies, they called the parade off. It's hardly raining. And then I said, well, maybe I had the time wrong. So I drove over to the high school side, because there's not even a fire truck there. It's like, how'd they get the fire truck out of there so fast? I drove to Metacomet, nobody's there. I come back to middle school, nobody's there. Now it's like 4:05. And I go, I can't believe they called this parade off. And then I see in Patch, or on Facebook the next morning, these pictures of real fire trucks and real people and real baseball players. And I had just watched a Twilight Zone replay on Facebook. It was this one about this phantom plane that pulls up to the gate, and when they open it up, nobody's there. And the whole story is about this one investigator who's trying to solve the problem. And at the end of the story, it's that it was the one case he had never solved 20 years ago, and the plane wasn't really there. And it was like, I felt like the fire truck was not really there, but the picture in Facebook said it was. So I'm 0 for 2, but I'm getting closer.
So here's the
I was
deal,
there at the
because
right
you didn't
time.
make it last year, they moved it to Dale Street. So that's when we started last year, that's when we started this year. But it was good, we missed you. We went by Pete's office, he wasn't there. I think you were laying low that day.
He was probably playing baseball somewhere.
And so I'm actually going to a meeting on Friday at 10 a.m. DCHC, is that the right acronym? They're doing a walkthrough at the Affordable Housing Trust over at 441 Main, that project. We did not have an Affordable Housing Trust meeting in early May because of the town meeting, so we'll have our next one early June.
DHCD.
DHCD, there we go. I knew I had my acronym wrong. Also want to just let you guys know that I have received a few emails from residents post town meeting regarding the well, and all very complimentary, that they appreciate the fact that we've stopped, that we are, and I would like to rendezvous at the next meeting to figure out when would be the best time to start holding some informational sessions, so that we can, and I've got some of the names, obviously, that I will reach out to personally to let them know where we're at, and if they can't make it to the meeting, that I focus on the one-on-one. And there is an Eagle Scout ceremony this Saturday. We've got 4 young men with, I think it's true 89. And I have you check them to make sure the sales are correct. And other than that, I think we are good.
Okay, thank you. I had a very interesting time on Monday night. The schools and the MCAP, Medfield Cares About Protection, had a joint meeting for people in town to talk about the Metro West Adolescent Health Survey. And this is what tells about how our kids were doing in November of 2021. We're getting the data back from November, when the kids took it in November of 2021 at this point. And unfortunately, Medfield ranks high in stress, alcohol use, marijuana use, higher than the rest of Metro West, and higher than the state, and higher than the nation. They said that was part of the reason that we got the SAMHSA grant, the $625,000 grant, was because we were rating higher than other towns. I hadn't never realized, I'd never heard that said before. So, and I hope that they circulate the slides that show the different data that they've collected about that, because it is very compelling. We need to be doing something better to protect our kids, because the increased risk to an adolescent having a lifelong addiction problem with alcohol just goes up astronomically the earlier they start using alcohol. It's if you start at age 14 or 15 maybe, I think it went up 45%. The Medfield Foundation Legacy Fund had their event where they honored the Hinckley Helpers, the people that received the grants from the Medfield Foundation this year. And it was Hinckley Helpers, Medfield TV, with a very interesting one where they have some sort of gizmo that allows them, bless you, to actually do live feed better. I thought that was just fascinating. Zulu had this one where they were looking to do virtual art. Chris was there about that with Bill Pope. And then the gristmill, they're looking to put a new roof on their facility. And there was an event to celebrate them at Seventh Wave. I had office hours last Friday, my first Friday of the month office hours at the center. And I had a repeat customer, Patty Barron, came, and she had a list of 7 different points. And I ended up sending emails to the chief of police, the director of the DPW, and the Council on Aging about her list of 7 things that she had noticed that she thought could get improved or taken care of in the town. I had someone approach me about the noise from the Westwood Gun Club. And I had to explain that we'd looked into that, and unfortunately we have no control. There's a state statute that pretty much gives us 0 ability to deal with the noise. Someone told me today, which interested me as a neighbor of the Hinckley South project, that the affordable senior housing is being marketed at $770,000 to $900,000. So I think that we're not really creating affordable housing at that site, unfortunately.
Wait, so is it, just to make sure I'm on the same page as you, so that's not the 40B. So the 40B will be the 2 to 300, like, I think it's around 300,000, and then the market price.
Those are usually under
Yeah.
300,000.
Yeah, so the market price.
Yeah, that's the market price, although a lot of the thinking was that what the recommendation from the consultant, who's now the town planner, I think, in Dover, was that we put a lot of them in, and the market would then allow them to be priced lower because they were so densely located.
That's still, if you look at what's going on, look at the home that's, Chief Mann's old home. I think it's going for 1.2 million, right? And talk about a completely different layout than what you have up at Hinckley South, so I think it's all relative.
If those are
Housing's
the
very
market rate units, I can see how they could be that high.
7 or
I'm
8
trying
is
to
not
remember.
bad.
You can look at that. I'm trying to remember what the projected market rate for the colonial style, and I think that was at least 650 a couple of years ago, and it might even been 700. If I remember right, the ranches, the lower ones, they're not below 3. I think there's like 450, and I think the colonials were like 600 of the affordable ones.
I
They were
know
like
this was
450
when
to
Bob
6,
gave me a
if I
tour
remember.
of the very first one. When you drive in and you see the very first one that was built,
Yep.
the very first one there is a 40B, and I believe at the time, he's like, don't hold me to this, I leave at like 286.
Oh, really?
3%.
Okay.
And then
okay.
the one next to it's Market One, and that was the one he was like, again, because of the market and everything, that could be 6 to 7.
Yeah.
Don't hold me to it. So what
Yeah.
you're saying is not too far off from what
Okay.
he was projecting, and I think with the interest rates and all, it's
Well, the affordable unit, if that's the price of the affordable unit, that's better than I had in my head, because I was thinking it was more than that. So I'm delighted to hear if it was anything even close to that.
The
that's
affordable
a-
units have always been coming in at that sort of range. When you see the ones at the Larkin project on Hospital Road, they've always been in that same
But we
range,
all
around
know that
280.
what Bob's doing, though, is keeping them. I challenge anyone to walk into the 40B and the regular, and if you didn't know, and you said which one, you wouldn't be able to pick it out, period.
Yes.
Which he gets
Yeah.
phenomenal
And that's-
accolades from the state.
That's the way it should be done.
Yeah, it should be done, exactly.
And that's all for me. Anything else that we need to be taking care of?
I don't know, I'll just give you a quick little thing, if anyone's a geek, which I am. I watched the Google presentation today, like, Apple does their presentation. So Google did their thing. So a year from now, if all goes well and I'm chair, I just have to say to Google, help me with the agenda tonight, blah, 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 blah. What they showed and what the technology's gonna be is absolutely mind-boggling with how AI is gonna impact searches, how they can help you literally, if you wanna do a letter for a refund for something, they'll say, Google, write a letter for whatever, and then, no, I want a little more detail. And they just typed up the letter, like it was for a refund for an airline ticket for a flight that got delayed. I was like, okay, this is,
So for those of you who've been watching this meeting and you think that Eileen is here tonight, she's not. It's an
so on that note,
Okay.
Chris?
my glasses.
I just wanted to thank you all for the support on Medfield History Weekend. We ended up having over 700 people participate, and we raised money for each of the historic groups. So I just wanted to share that, and thank you for coming out. And sorry, Pete, you missed it because
I didn't have that on my list, I apologize. I did
Yeah,
say
no, that's
yes,
okay.
yes,
No,
the
no,
movie,
but it
yeah.
was
excellent.
great. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that looked like a great weekend. I saw Richard touring people through town, I saw the trolley on Sunday.
Yeah, and we had a hearty group of people come for, despite the wet weather, for John Thompson's walk. We had over 40 people show up for that, and
Oh, good.
he's doing another one on the 21st, so anybody that's interested, so,
Certainly,
21st
thank
of
you
this
for
month?
putting that on Friday night. That was a lot of fun.
yeah, it was fun.
Chris, is that May 21 he's doing it?
Yes.
Exactly, yeah,
what
11:30
time?
a.m. 11:30,
Thank you.
You had that in your Medfield,
yeah.
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 Okay.
I also got some more out, too. Yeah, but I just wanted to thank everybody, because everybody was so supportive, and it was really nice to see Christine and Brittany on the front lawn with Brittany's daughter, our son, sorry, giving out all kinds of information for town meeting. So it's a team effort downtown.
There we go.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for putting it on. Do we have a motion to adjourn then?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Good night, everyone.